Okay, so we're diving into this really timely issue,
Yeah,
this New York Times article about FEMA staffing shortages
right.
as Hurricane Milton barrels towards Florida.
Yeah, it's a really
It feels like the perfect storm,
that
literally.
that does feel a little on the nose, doesn't it?
Yeah, so for our listeners, maybe paint a picture. Like, why should we care about this right now?
Well, imagine this. You're in Tampa, Florida, right? And you're watching the
Oh,
news.
this is a bad one.
Hurricane Milton swirling closer every update. It's bigger, it's stronger.
The spaghetti models are not
Oh, they're not looking good.
not looking good now.
No. And, you need to get out, you need to evacuate, but
Yeah.
maybe you're not able to do that easily on your own.
Right, you need some extra help. Exactly.
Maybe you're elderly, maybe you have a disability, you need assistance. And so you're thinking, okay, FEMA, that's who we turn to in these situations. But what if I told you that FEMA is stretched thinner than ever before?
Yeah, that's what this New York Times article is saying, and it's kind of terrifying, frankly. Only 9%
9%.
of FEMA personnel are ready to be deployed for Hurricane Milton.
That's a historically low number.
And I was blown away when I read that compared to just a few years that like 2017 when we had Harvey, Irma, and Maria all back to back.
Yeah, that was a brutal hurricane season.
It really was, but FEMA had more than double
Double.
the available personnel then compared to what they have today.
It's a staggering difference, isn't
Then
it?
it really is. So, okay, it's bad, but is this like we're all doomed bad, or is it more like a slow burning crisis?
I would say it's definitely a crisis.
Yeah.
This New York Times article, along with this GAO report you shared, paints a very concerning picture. It's not just Hurricane Milton. It's like the entire country is a disaster zone right now.
It really does feel that way.
It does. And the GAO report highlights there are over 100 active disaster declarations across the country as we speak.
100.
Over 100. Hurricane Helene just hit North Carolina. Remember those floods in Vermont?
Devastating.
Tornadoes ripping through Kansas, wildfires in Arizona. It's like everywhere you turn.
And those are just the headlines, right?
Exactly. Who knows what else is going on that we're not even hearing about?
It's overwhelming. And I know people hear GAO report and they're like, oh my gosh, more bureaucracy.
Right.
But this one is actually really eye-opening. It found a 35% vacancy rate within FEMA.
35%.
Yeah.
That's more than just a staffing shortage. That's a 5-alarm fire.
Right. It's not like, oh, we're short a couple people.
No, it's a significant portion of their workforce just gone.
And the GAO report connects this directly to the increase in disasters that we've been seeing, right?
Exactly. It's the frequency and the intensity of these events.
Imagine working at FEMA. You know, it's no longer like, okay, once every few years we've got a big one to deal with. Now it's like constant,
It's relentless.
emotionally draining. I can't even imagine the toll that takes. And the GAO report really digs into that.
They do.
And that's leading to burnout, people leaving faster than they can be replaced.
And we're not just talking about desk jobs here, right?
Yeah.
These are people who are on the front lines responding to incredibly difficult, traumatic situations.
Exactly. The article highlights the stat that only
Yeah.
4 people from FEMA's individual assistants cadre out of over 2,500 are ready to deploy.
These are the boots on the ground folks, right?
Yeah.
The ones who are there to help people directly after a disaster.
Yeah, the ones going door to door, checking on people, getting them the resources they need.
And there's just a handful of them available.
It's unbelievable. So we're talking about a system that's already struggling, and now it's facing this potential mega disaster
Right.
with just a fraction of the manpower it actually needs.
It's a recipe for disaster in itself, isn't it?
It really is. It's hard to wrap your head around, honestly.
Yeah.
So knowing all of this, how on earth does FEMA even start to tackle this? I mean, they can't just like magically make trained people appear.
Right. It's like they're trying to build a boat while they're already sinking. you know?
exactly.
The article does mention some things FEMA is doing, like pulling staff from leave.
Yeah.
Vacations are canceled, and everyone's on deck,
Yeah, I bet.
which, makes sense in the short term, I guess. But
But how sustainable is that, really?
exactly, especially if this is the new normal with these disasters coming more and more often.
Talk about a recipe for burnout.
Right.
And it's not even just about having enough warm bodies, right?
Yeah.
You need specific skills to do these jobs at FEMA.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't just take someone off the street and ask them to assess the safety of a collapsed building or, help someone navigate FEMA's aid process. That takes training experience.
For sure. So they're relying on volunteers and help from other agencies.
They are. And the article mentions that they make sure those folks get training for their specific roles.
Okay, so at least there are some protocols in place. But even with all that, is it really enough? I mean, isn't that just kind of shifting the burden around not actually solving the problem?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, FEMA can activate agreements with private contractors, bring in people from other parts of Homeland Security, even other federal agencies if they have to.
Wow, so it's all hands on deck.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But it's a logistical nightmare, and there's no guarantee that it will be enough. This really highlights the limits of how we approach disaster response right now.
Yeah, it's like we're always playing catch up,
Exactly.
especially when you throw in the funding issues. Congress just approved more money for FEMA's disaster relief fund. But this article quotes the Homeland Security Secretary, Mayorkas, and he's saying, even before Hurricane Milton, before this latest crisis, that it still wouldn't be enough. They're always scrambling for resources.
Always. And that raises a bigger question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What should our disaster preparedness strategy actually look like
Yeah.
when these events are becoming more frequent and more intense because of climate change?
Exactly.
Is it sustainable to just keep throwing money at the problem after the fact? Or do we need to completely rethink how we prepare for these events before they even happen?
It's like that saying, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly.
But prevention takes planning, foresight, investment. And that's not always as appealing to politicians, I guess, as, swooping in after a disaster and looking like a hero.
Right. It's about those short-term gains versus the long-term vision.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, disaster preparedness rarely gets the attention it deserves until it's too late.
Until it's front page news, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then the article talks about how FEMA is shifting resources away from long-term recovery efforts to deal with Hurricane Milton right now.
Which makes sense. I mean, that's the immediate crisis.
Of course, but it's a trade-off, and it has real consequences for people's lives.
How so?
While long-term recovery, that's things like rebuilding infrastructure, providing mental health services to survivors, helping businesses get back on their feet.
All the things that are essential but maybe don't have that immediate urgency.
Exactly. But if those needs aren't met, it can have long-lasting effects on communities.
It's like a wound that never fully heals.
Exactly. It can make it even harder for those communities to bounce back after the next disaster, which seems more and more likely in this day and age.
So it's this vicious cycle, understaffed, underfunded, forced to make impossible choices, all while facing a growing number of disasters. That's pretty bleak.
It is a tough reality to face, but I think recognizing these challenges is the first step to finding solutions.
So if this is the new normal, what are some potential ways out of this cycle of reactive crisis management? That's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. I mean, it sounds like it's not enough to just give FEMA more money,
Right.
although I'm hearing that wouldn't hurt.
It's a good start.
But we need to be thinking bigger picture, like how we approach disaster preparedness and response from the ground up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation that needs to happen everywhere at every level, from individual communities all the way up to the federal government.
So what does that look like in practical terms?
Well, the article mentions building codes, for example,
Right.
especially in hurricane-prone areas.
Right.
Stronger buildings mean less damage, fewer injuries, less strain on everyone when a storm hits.
It's like investing in a good raincoat.
Exactly.
You might not need it every day, but when the storm hits, you're going to be glad you have it.
Exactly. And that kind of foresight, unfortunately, it often takes a disaster for people to really take it seriously.
Yeah, it's like we don't fix the roof until it's already raining.
Which is why it's so important to learn from what's happening right now with Hurricane Milton and this crisis at FEMA. Because this isn't just some abstract policy debate. This is about real people's lives.
Absolutely.
The family in Tampa who needs help evacuating the small business owner whose livelihood is on the line. The first responders who are risking their own safety to help others. They're all being impacted by this.
And it's easy to feel powerless in the face of all this, right?
It is.
But you keep using this phrase, the new normal, and I think that's really key here. If this is the reality we're facing, more frequent, more intense disasters, well, then maybe we need to fundamentally shift our perspective.
I think so. We can't just keep reacting in crisis mode after the fact.
Right.
We need to be proactive. We need to be prepared.
Yeah.
And that means investing in things like early warning systems.
So people have more time to evacuate, to prepare.
Exactly. It means strengthening community bonds so that people are there for each other when something happens. Because, let's face it, sometimes your neighbors are going to be there faster than FEMA can be.
That's a really good point. And it's on all of us, right, to build those connections, to be prepared ourselves, to check on our neighbors, to make sure our own families have a plan.
It's a collective effort, for sure. And it also means putting pressure on our elected officials to make this a priority.
Because it shouldn't matter if you're red or blue.
Exactly. This is about our collective safety and well-being.
So as we watch Hurricane Milton and see the strain on FEMA, let's use this as a wake-up call to demand better preparation, better response, and a more sustainable future.
Couldn't said it better myself.
Well, this has been a sobering, but also, I think, really important conversation.
I agree.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by the scale of these problems, but I think you've given us a lot to think about today and hopefully some concrete steps we can all take to create a more resilient future.
That's what I was hoping for.
Well, thanks for diving into this with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, stay safe, and we'll be back next time with another deep dive.